Hi there, and welcome to the Y Factor podcast.
Wait, sorry, what are we talking about?
The Y Factor podcast. It's where young elected politicians, or YEPs, share how they're making real changes across Europe.
Alright, I'm in. Let's hear what the future sounds like.
Welcome to YEPs on the Ground, the podcast that brings young voices to the heart of Europe. Today, we're honored to be joined by Francisco Ferreira, a young elected politician from Portugal, representing the Greens political group at the Committee of the Regions. Welcome.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here.
And so before we dive into this conversation, we'd love to get to know you a bit better. And so first, I want to ask you if you have a motto in life, something that guides you inside, but also outside of politics.
Yes, so I prefer to use the word of wise people that are much better in creating mottos than me. So there is a very famous Portuguese writer that won the Nobel Prize of Literature called Saramago. And translated to English, one of his most famous sentences is, don't be in a hurry, but don't waste time. So the main message is about a balance, that we all need a balance in life, but also in politics. There is always two sides and you need to strike a good balance. And I think is a motto that I like.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it can really help people like the finding a balance. And I also want to ask you, when did you first feel European?
Yes, so for me, at least the moment that strikes me the first as being European was when I did Erasmus. So I'm from Portugal. I'm very far from most of other countries, except of course Spain. And I wanted to go somewhere completely different. And I chose East Europe. I applied to Lithuania and Slovakia, and then in the end I studied 1 year in Bratislava, the capital of Slovakia. And it was completely different from me. So my biggest group of friends was mostly Germans and Polish that I haven't met before. And then, of course, I was studying with people from, 15 different countries and living, studying, and doing everything. And so many different people, good people. And that's the first time I really felt European.
Yeah, when you're surrounded by many different Europeans, I get that this is an experience that you will never forget. Moving on to our next section, could you maybe tell us about your political role at the local level and how it connects with your role here at the Committee of the Region?
Yes. So Lisbon is divided in 25 districts or regions. I don't know exactly the name. Some people say like arrondissement, other people say district or civil parish. So it's 25. And each of them has a government and a parliament. Very small one, of course. The government is like 5 people and the parliament 19. Something very small, and I'm elected by the LIVRE, so one of the Portuguese Green parties within that parliament. And the parliament has 2 main functions. So the first one is to supervise the government, so to ensure that the government of the parish d'arrondissement is doing the right things, and second, to propose the guidelines for the government. And it can be in the big topics at local level, like housing, mobility, or even transparency with public contracts. It can be all these big things, but we also take care of a lot of smaller things. For example, there are many examples. One example was the creation of, we called it the bike train for kids, which is, so there is 2 people on bicycle that go through the neighborhoods and they collect kids also by bicycle, and then they go all together in a kind of a train of bicycles to the schools within the region. Or it can be even more simple things like people are complaining that they need, in front of the school there is a crosswalk that needs to be repainted, or a traffic light that failed, or small things like that. So very broad what we do, but basically it's two things: supervise the government and telling them the big guidelines of what to do.
And so how does it connect with your role at the European Committee of the Region as a YEP?
Yeah, so as I am elected, I applied to become a YEP, which, by the way, it's a great experience, and I really recommend that anyone that can to apply. And so I went to the YEP. I had the possibility of speaking about housing, which is a big topic, both at local level, but also at national level and European level, for not only for young people, like actually for everyone. So the connection is that I'm elected at a local level and I could participate in the Committee of the Regions.
First of all, thank you for sharing your work locally, and I think it's really interesting to get to know better what you do, what's your competences, and also the small projects that you lead there. And so leading on to that, I want to ask you if you can maybe share with us a project or initiative that you have been involved in and that has had a meaningful impact in your community.
I already shared one, which is these bike trains, but my favorite is probably the creation of renewable energy community within it's called Lumiar, the area of Lisbon where I'm elected, and so it's one of the first renewable energy communities in Portugal, the real one, because you have many, but for example, where you have a building and there is a private company that installs solar panels, but then everything is managed by the company. It's not really a community. While here, it's really because all the decisions are decentralized. So each participant has a vote to decide how to manage the community, and it works. It's very simple. So first, the arrondissement, the civil parish, allows the community to install solar panels in public buildings. For example, it's not the city hall, but it's the arrondissement hall, or in the public schools, or any public building. Right now, it's the schools, the headquarters of the government, and the sports pavilion. And basically, anyone within the 2 kilometers area can participate. So they invest money, and the community buys solar panels, installs it, and then the energy is distributed among the members. It's good for everyone because with a small investment, you can actually have energy from solar panels. You don't need to invest much. You don't need space because it's in public buildings, and it's good for the public government also because they can also use that energy without any effort because the community takes care of everything. And actually, we even received 2 European Union grants. One of them called Urban Doers, and they liked the project, and they told us that if you do a guide to help create other communities, we could use the grant, which has been very, very useful to start the project, and it's going very well.
That's nice to hear that some projects like this can be done at the local level and can have such a meaningful impact. And also, thanks for mentioning the importance of European funds in local projects and how we can link the local level with European Union. So Speaking about the research that we did about your work, we found that through your role as a YEP, you really want to encourage young people to get involved in politics. And as young people ourselves, we are aware that there are many factors that hinder greater political engagement among young Europeans. Some are widely mentioned, like the lack of trust in institutions, political disillusionment, or sometimes lack of civic education. But one topic that is really rarely mentioned is the physical distance, in particular for people living in rural or peripheral areas around bigger cities, and the role that this distance can play in preventing young people from coming together, organizing, and participating in political party communities. Do you think this question of distance is a significant barrier to political engagement?
I think yes. So it's not easy. It's not an easy question, but I think it is. It might be a barrier, but and actually, I think technology could help. But honestly, from at least at political level, technology might have more bad impacts than good so far, because it can be used for good and for bad. And we see a lot of, for example, the fake news, fake information, all around social media, etc. While this could be a tool to make distance a less important subject, because people could be more connected, etc. But we are actually more lonely and more misinformed. So what might help, apart from, of course, technology, is definitely direct democracy or local politics. Because when we think about politics, a lot of times we think about the big topics, healthcare, education, justice, everything that is a bit far, because we don't use healthcare all the time, or justice services, fortunately. But what we do use is on our day-to-day life. When we go to school, to university, to work, everything around us is actually politics. Politics is the management of public good, and through local politics, we can involve those people. We can involve anyone, and this could be something very small. Like, for example, an example I mentioned before. If you live far from the political decision center, but there is a crosswalk close to the school of where your kid goes to school, and it needs to be painted because cars don't see it and they go very fast, and you go to your local elected person and you tell it, and there is actually some action, you are happy. And I think one of the biggest problems now between politics and the people, the distance that is created is not only physical, but it's also the fact that people do not participate because they feel it won't change anything. So why waste time if it will not change anything? But through these small things, we can make them understand that their participation changes. And it can be very, very small things. It can be, another good example I know is to bring the community to decide, for example, which flowers to plant on the main square of the neighborhood. And then every time you arrive tired from work or from school, you see the flowers you like, you are happy, and because it was a political decision where you participate. So I think this is I think distance is an issue, but if we act at local level, convincing people that their participation has a difference, I think we can tackle the issue, at least partially.
I think it's really interesting what you just said about how getting involved in local politics can actually make people closer to political decision, and there is no need to go to the bigger political centers to have an impact. I think that is a really interesting thing. And so what role do you think transport can play? Do you think it's a factor that can have an impact on this challenge of the lack of youth engagement?
Yes. Yeah, transport is definitely an issue because, as I said, certain public services you don't use often, but others you do. And transportation is something that we use almost every day, right? If you go to the shop, if you go to work, anything, we use it. And if you are not happy with the service, then consequently we are not happy with the political with the politicians, because they are not managing what we use and what we like efficiently. And also on this, I want to emphasize that the decision can be made at local level. It doesn't have at very local level. I mean, not even at the CTO level, but even at the regional, at arrondissement, civil parish, district level. For example, you can create. There is in some places these shared bicycles, where you can just get a bike here and then you leave it somewhere else. And in Lisbon, for example, they implemented it and it's been a big success. So even these smaller things can work. What is important is that there is a participation from young people in the decision process, because the first step to solve the problems is to understand and to hear from the young people which are the problems, and this doesn't happen as often as it should.
And so we spoke before about the digitalization, and so now many activities can be done remotely, and so physical presence is no longer required in every situation. You've spoken about also the risks about digitalization, but do you think that still digital spaces can maybe compensate for the lack of physical proximity for having meaningful political participation?
Yeah, I think we are not there yet, at least. So I think right now it might happen in the future, but I don't think right now the digital world can compensate for the lack of physical proximity. Might happen in the future, but not now. Again, there is a lot of risks, and there is, for example, now with these AI videos that are looking more and more real. So there are a lot of risks, and at some point, technology will be used for good. And there is a lot of things that, for example, just the fact that if there is a safe way to vote online, for sure more people would participate, because some don't participate because it's a bit difficult. You need to go. Well, so that's just one example, but we are not there yet.
And now moving on to, so still on the topic of transport, but moving a bit our focus. So we've seen that you've been involved in several projects, so focused on young people and also their professional developments. From your experience, what role do you think the environmental factors play in people's decision making when it comes to their mode of transportation, whether it's like long distance or more local transport? Do you think people so consider the environmental impact of the mode of transportation they choose in their decision?
Yes, fortunately, yes. I think it's an important factor when people choose their transportation methods. So, and actually, I think there is a big gap between, for example, older generation and young generation. I think the younger generation is much more conscious about this topic, about environmental factors. Also when they choose their transportation method. So the problem is that many times, a lot of times, too many times maybe, you don't have enough options. I can give you an example. For example, so I live in Lisbon, and if I want to go to the closest European capital apart from Lisbon, which is Madrid, it's 600 kilometers, so it's not that much. So it's maybe a bit more than an hour by plane. But if I want to go by train, it takes me more than 10 hours, and I have to change at least twice. So I need to catch 2 or 3 trains, and it takes me 7 or 8 times more than by plane. So it's very difficult to, if there is no infrastructure, it's difficult to do it. But there is a lot of pressure from young people, not only in Portugal. I know in Portugal better because I know the reality better, but all over Europe, there is a good pressure to invest in transport infrastructure that is environmental friendly.
And you think that local and regional authorities can play a role in this, developing some sustainable ways of transportation that young people feel inclined to use?
Yes, yeah, of course. And in fact, if we think about it, the most of our transport decisions, or transport routes, are very local. I gave the example of Lisbon, Madrid, but this is not something that that we do often. What we do often is to go to the school, to the university, to work, to the shop, to meet some friends. And that is very local. And if we have the correct infrastructure, that's the first step. We use it. And of course, if the decision of the local authority is to invest in public transport instead of investing, for example, in parking for cars, then I'll have more chances to take a public transport than to take my car. So the local authorities have a fundamental role and a huge impact on this type of decisions of our life in terms of local transportation.
And do you think they also can have an impact to encourage these types of transportation, or to encourage people taking them, using them?
Yes, yeah, of course. For example, at school level, the local authorities can not only, for example, create awareness about the different type of transports that you have, but also create initiatives like the one I mentioned before of a group of kids that go to school by bicycle, and they can only do it because there is a project at local level that was created at local level that exists, and maybe otherwise these kids would be dropped by the parents by car directly to the school, and now because of a local level initiative they have the chance of going by bicycle, which is a very good example, I think.
Thank you. I think throughout our whole discussion you really showed how the local level can have an impact, whether it's to help young people get engaged and so break this distance from the political world, and also to help just people using more ways of transportation, having the opportunity to move in a sustainable manner. Thank you for joining us today, and so sharing those really meaningful and valuable insights and experiences that you have. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to learn more about Francisco's work, you'll find more information in the episode description. Stay tuned for more conversations with inspiring young Europeans. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram for updates. Make sure to catch our next episode to discover who will be joining us as the next host and guest. Thank you.